welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Robyn Alley-Hay. She's a retired obstetrician gynecologist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, How Shame Almost Ruined a Physician's Life. Robyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for your work.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
I was a graduate at University of Kansas and then went on to a OB/GYN residency in the University of Kansas and then went into private practice. I've practiced a couple different private practices and loved my career. And most recently, I've retired that career and I'm now a physician coach. And also I nourish myself with working with some Tibetan Buddhists in a nonprofit.
Wonderful. And I want to talk about a little bit about that transition into physician coaching. So what were some of the factors when making that decision from active clinical practice to coaching?
You know, I think I found coaching along a time when I felt stuck and when I was questioning, I was seeking, and I found coaching and I just fell in love with it. I mean, that's what I've been doing for years in my clinical practice, you know, with the women I was seeing, was basically coaching. And I found that it was just a natural fit. So after falling in love with it, I decided to do it full time. I trained at a ICF certified place, and currently I'm in training to become a specific physician coach. And I just turned my sights towards physicians basically in the last couple of years. For the few years before that, I was doing general coaching, but my heart really goes to my colleagues. And I finally said, okay, that's what I'm focusing on.
What are some of the common issues that you're seeing physicians face in your coaching practice?
Oh, well, I mostly coach women. And there's often this feeling of disempowerment. And I call myself an empowerment coach. Basically, women are wanting to go somewhere in their career or in their parenthood or, you know, as a mom, and they're just feeling disempowered or stuck about it. Being able to look at things, I mean, coaching is basically you're well, and I'm your peer, and I'm going to ask you questions. That's coaching. I'm going to ask you good questions, but I'm going to ask you questions that you answer yourself. And a lot of it has to do with our blind spots and our limiting beliefs. And it's looking at this side of your hand and then turning it over, looking at that side of your hand and looking at this again. And people go through transformation, really see the power that they have after they've done several coaching sessions. So that's just really gratifying.
Wonderful. Best wishes on your coaching practice.
Oh, thank you.
So let's go into your Kevin MD article now. How shame almost ruined a physician's life. Now, for those who haven't read the article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Well, this is a story, and I consider myself a storyteller. And part of my recovery has been my recovering as a perfectionist, and a recovery from depression has been sharing my stories. Mm-hmm. And now that I'm out of medicine, except for what I do with the nonprofit, I can say and tell my stories without worrying about the consequences. And this has been a story that has tripped me up in my life. And so it's all about a woman who came from Mexico to my labor deck. I mean, it's a long time ago, still impacting me. She came to my labor deck, and it was her fourth child, and she ended up dying in our care after she had given birth in Mexico on dirt floors previously. And it's my journey with, I describe how it was and how it haunted me as far as going back to that scene again and again and again, and the impact that it had, negative impact it had on my life, to not recognize that and to not talk about it and not process it.
So go into a little bit more detail, if you can. Tell me how that story did impact not only your life, but your professional career as well.
Well, I think it was, nobody said anything after she passed away. I mean, I was really clear, what could I think everybody goes through this with a loss, and it's really tragic when it's a maternal loss. Not that it's not tragic at other times, but it's really unexpected. Let's just
Mhm.
say that. And I didn't know what to do with that. And there was no like, let's talk about this. Let's debrief this. There was M&M, which was very uncomfortable. You could have done this. You could have done that.
Mhm.
But there was really no, let's talk about it. Let's talk about grief and how that impacts the physician. The person that came in to relieve me in the middle of trying to save this woman's life and doing a cesarean hysterectomy was my husband, my ex-husband now. But I mean, I handed it off to him as was appropriate in a residency. And we never even looked at each other. We never talked about it. I have no idea how he feels about that incident. And I think it's just something that was just like when you're a recovering perfectionist, I think we're all perfectionists in this profession. And then there's this part of us that we're told we're not good enough along our training. And we're told, well, that was good, but not good enough again. And so some of us are more prone to shame than others, but getting into that shame can be just a really dark, dark place to go. And that's kind of what I describe in the article.
What are some of the things that you did to reconcile those feelings of shame, and how long did that take?
Well, I tell you, it wasn't until I wrote this article that I really let it go. I mean, I was finally well enough to like go, okay, I'm going to share this story in case somebody else is experiencing something similar. I ended up with a postpartum depression with the birth of my third child in residency. And then I was actually suicidal at one point about 6 years into my practice. And I wouldn't say it was all of this. This was just a really good example of that. I'm not good enough. I feel shame for having made a mistake kind of thinking. So that was kind of a long journey for me. I practiced while I was there, but it was still not free and not a created life that I have now.
So you mentioned that you couldn't share the story until you were retired. Can you share some of the obstacles that prevented you from sharing that story
Oh,
while you
absolutely.
were practicing?
There's always the fear of being sued. Kind of, there's this gagging, I think, that happens where we can't talk about it freely because of that fear. There's what are my attendings going, like if I would have written this back in my residency, what would my attendings say about this and about me putting that out into the public? So it wasn't really appropriate at that time. But the sharing part has, for me, been just really liberating. And I've heard from so many other people that have experienced the shame with, deaths and complications that they've had in their practice.
And to be clear, how many years has it been since the incident and the
Oh,
time you wrote the story?
this was probably in 1993.
Okay.
Been a long time. And just having the freedom to not have that come back at you, like your program director is like on the oral boards panel. There's all kinds of reasons why. I kind of held that one in and didn't say much about it.
So from what you know now about residencies currently, if young physicians go through a similar situation like that, has anything changed since the time that you went through this incident?
I hope so. In talking to some clients and other friends that are colleagues, not always. Stuff, I talked to somebody recently who there was a death of a patient and nobody talked about it. They just went on. I mean, it was somebody they worked with too. And they just went on with their work. Just like now with COVID-19, there's no time to pause. You just go on with your work. And there's appropriate times to pause, but I hope it's better. I hope it's better. And that's, what I'm all about is bringing humanity to medicine in a cultural change.
Now, for those physicians who unfortunately go through a similar event, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Well, I think go to your support systems in a way that you can appropriately share the story and how that's impacting you. I think the worst thing that we can do when this happens is isolate.
Hmm.
Shame is a really great isolator. And I think that's why the story was with me so long, is because I tended to internalize that and isolate. So it's really a matter of reaching out to your fellows when something, your colleagues, when something like this happens, for the support that they need, possibly seeing a counselor or, whatever is needed to support the person at that time.
So you talked about writing your story and how helpful that was, and I certainly
Mhm.
appreciate that you shared that story with Kevin MD. So go into a little bit more detail about that, but how cathartic, how healing was it for you to share this story on Kevin MD and have other people read it?
Oh, it was just really great, Kevin. I mean, I really appreciate having the space to do that. For me, I hadn't even told my children about this. I have 4 adult children. I'd never talked to my ex-husband about it. My current husband, I hadn't really told him about the depth of my feelings and how much that would repeat, repeat, repeat. So really, there's narrative medicine for a reason, narrative inquiry, and writing it down and knowing that possibly it would help another person know that they're not alone was really, really important to me.
We're talking to Robyn Alley-Hay. She's an obstetrician gynecologist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, How Shame Almost Ruined a Physician's Life. Robyn, what's your take-home message that you want to share with the Kevin MD audience?
We're going to be in this period of time, once this pandemic is hopefully over, when there's going to be a lot of traumatized physicians. And I think the message is to care for each other and to not isolate, reach out. There's groups now on social media. There's many coaches that can help, just be the person that listens if you need something outside your institution. So I would say, no, you're not alone, would be my message. And anybody who needs help, reach out.
Robyn, thank you so much for sharing your time, insight, and story. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.